Everyone is living in a movie of their own. The only problem is, most are not the director. They're just background characters in the script of their own life. You go through each day as if someone else wrote the rules. This is what you must do to be accepted. This is how you must act to be loved. This is what you must pretend, even when you're falling apart inside. But one day, when the noise fades, when you're lying there alone, with the real plane in your mind, you know something is deeply wrong. And in that moment, you face two choices: either keep acting in the old script, or become your own Tarantino. Sit down, in silence, and rewrite everything. No one gave Tarantino a path. No one gave him permission to become a legend. He only had one thing: an unshakable obsession with the story he had to tell. A story that didn't need to be logical, didn't need to please the masses. It just had to be true. And the same goes for you. If your life feels unfinished, tangled, off course, maybe it's time to sit with yourself and write a new script, with ruthless honesty, with a pen called courage. 1. You don't change because you're afraid of facing yourself. There is a harsh truth that most people avoid their whole lives. You don't change because you don't know what to change, but because you're afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid of the mirror within. The mirror you've long covered with layers of justification, self-soothing, delay, and pretending everything's fine. You're not lacking awareness. You're lacking the courage to face it. You know very well what's not right in your life. A relationship that's dried up but you're too afraid to end. A job that bores you but you still hold on. Self-destructive habits you repeat every single day. You know it all, but every time you're about to face it, you turn away, because deep down, you know, once you look straight at it, there will be no more excuses. You'll have to act, and action always comes with pain. You've grown used to a life of just enough to get by. Enough so no one criticizes you. Enough to not be left behind. Enough to not fall off the edge. But that very enough has become a trap. It's not enough for you to feel truly alive, yet just enough to convince you there's no urgent need to change. And so, you settle into a suspended state, half living, half dead, half awake, half asleep. You think change is a gradual process, that you just need to wait a bit longer, wait for the right time, wait for inspiration, and then you'll start. But the truth is, change never comes to those who wait. It only comes to those who dare to step into uncertainty. Even before they're ready. You've tried to change before, haven't you? And each time you failed, you told yourself, I'm not strong enough, I lack discipline, I don't have the right environment. But maybe, what you lack most isn't strength, it's truth. The truth that you're living a life you don't even respect. Friedrich Nietzsche once said, there is nothing more frightening than facing the truth about yourself. And that's exactly why you delay. Because you know that if you look straight at yourself, you'll have to admit, you spent years trying to please others. You've chosen safety over meaning. You've run from your true self, just to play the role of someone who's fine, pleasant, reasonable. Maybe you were once that child who got scolded for expressing true emotions. Maybe you were mocked for being different. Maybe you were left behind for not fitting in. And so, you learned to hide. You built a shell for yourself. Just kind enough, just obedient enough, just enough to be liked by everyone. But has anyone ever asked you, do you love yourself? The truth is, no one can change without reaching a breaking point. A sleepless night, a silent morning of tears, a moment in front of the mirror, when you no longer recognize who you are. Those moments, painful as a rip, are the very beginning of truth. Change doesn't begin when you find the right solution. It begins when you stop lying to yourself, when you pause and write down, where am I going wrong? How am I hurting myself? What am I running from? And you answer, without justifying, without blaming, without sugarcoating. Looking into the inner mirror is a violent act toward the old self. But it's also the only act that can save you, because only when you dare to admit you're falling apart, can you begin to rebuild. And that is what you've been postponing for far too long. 2. Procrastination is not harmless. It is a choice to continue living wrongly. We often lull ourselves with promises of, I'll deal with it tomorrow. As if time were a debt yet to be collected. As if each act of postponement were merely a pause, and not a silent, extended sentencing of our own lives. But try stopping for a moment and facing the truth. Procrastination is not harmless. It is not merely a delay. It is a choice, with full moral and spiritual consequences. Because every time you postpone doing what's right, you are choosing what's wrong. Every time you avoid doing what you know you must do, you are consciously choosing to continue living wrongly. And what's worse, you know it. There's no such thing as, I didn't choose anything. Procrastination is still a choice. And it chooses stagnation, mediocrity, repetition on your behalf. The more you procrastinate, the more you reinforce an outdated, weakened, and weary version of yourself. You think you're waiting for the right conditions, enough time, the right motivation, but in truth, you're choosing to live with the pain you've grown familiar with, simply because you're afraid of the pain that comes with something new. You don't dare to begin because you fear failure. But do you realize that procrastination is also a form of failure? A quiet one, a failure with no outburst, no embarrassment, nothing visible, yet it corrodes you day by day, like acid dripping onto the pride in your soul, until one evening, you lie down and find yourself unable to forgive yourself, not because of what you did, but because of what you knew you should do, and never began. That is the most expensive cost of procrastination. It kills the respect you have for yourself. People often think procrastination is just a lack of discipline, but it goes deeper. It's the fear of facing the truth. You know very well that if you truly sat down and looked at your life, you'd be forced to change. You'd have to leave behind what's familiar, end toxic relationships, and step into the fog of uncertainty. And you fear that so much, you'd rather choose pain, simply because it's predictable and familiar. Philosopher Soren Kierkegaard once said, "Anxiety is the price we pay for freedom." And it's true. You don't procrastinate because you're lazy. You procrastinate because you fear freedom. You fear that if you really change, you'll have no one left to blame, no place left to hide, no more excuse to call yourself a victim of circumstance. To change means to stand up and declare, "I take responsibility for my life." And you know what? That is a declaration more terrifying than any failure, but it's also the only declaration that has the power to save you. You may think procrastination is a neutral act. That's because you haven't started, nothing has changed. But that is the fatal error. Every day you don't act, the old patterns continue to win. Inaction doesn't mean nothing's changing. It means you're allowing the wrong to become permanent. Think about it. If every morning you wake up and say, "Not yet," then when will it ever be the right time? If you step back every time you get close to the edge, how will you ever cross it? If you're waiting for motivation, you'll wait forever, because motivation never comes before action. It only appears once you've already begun. And here is the most important thing you need to understand. Every act of procrastination counts. It accumulates. It leaves a mark. It forms a habit and shapes a personality. A procrastinator is not just someone who's always late. They are someone who is forming the habit of betraying themselves. So the next time you're about to say, "Maybe tomorrow," remember, every act of procrastination is a choice to continue living wrongly. Not because you don't know better, but because you haven't yet gathered the courage to do what's right. Ask yourself, if today were your last day, would you still postpone? If not, then why are you allowing yourself to do it today? Silence is the editing room of the soul. There is a space that very few dare to enter, not because it's dangerous, but because it's too real. No one forbids you from approaching it, yet you find every way to escape it. That space is called silence. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the absence of distraction, the absence of mental noise, the absence of all the things you use to fill the void inside you: phones, social media, work, busyness, or even meaningless conversations. Have you ever noticed that all the most important moments in life happen in silence? When you realize you've been living wrong, it's on a quiet evening, when all outside noise has faded, and you're left alone with yourself. When you are truly in pain about something, it's not spoken out loud, but clenched silently in your chest. When you come to a profound realization, it doesn't arrive in sermons, but in quietly observing something small, and feeling it touch your heart. Silence is the editing room of the soul. It's where you rewind the footage of your life, select the frames worth keeping, cut the excess scenes, and begin to rewrite the script. In noise, you live by reflex. In silence, you begin to live consciously. We don't avoid silence because it's meaningless, but because it leaves us nowhere to hide. In silence, you can't pretend, you can't blame, you can't perform. You can't borrow applause from others to reassure yourself that you're on the right path. Silence forces you to listen to a voice you haven't heard in a long time, your true inner voice. That voice is not loud. It doesn't scream for attention. It only whispers that you are tired, that you're on the wrong path, that you're trading truth for safety. And you know it, but you fear it's too true. You fear that if you follow it, your entire life will have to change. So you turn on the music. You scroll your screen. You message someone who doesn't matter. You open Netflix. You pretend to be busy. You do everything except sit still and face yourself. Montesquieu once said, "If I am not alone, I am not myself." And you, when was the last time you were truly alone? Not out of loneliness, but because you needed to be honest with yourself. You don't need more advice. You don't need another list of goals. What you need is a silence, deep enough to see the truth you've forgotten. In an age where everything can be live streamed, the most precious thing is a single second of pausing, a moment when you ask yourself, what am I really doing? A second to admit, the life I'm living is a rough draft of something unfinished and I know it. A second to admit, my busyness is a disguise, hiding my fear of facing the emptiness within. You can go your whole life without ever stepping into that room of silence. But if you dare to do it, even once, you'll begin to hear what no one else can tell you. You'll remember what you once believed, the dreams you abandoned, the limits others placed on you. And when you begin to touch the truth, you'll realize you have the power to choose again. Silence doesn't weaken you, it gives you back control. It is where the most important decisions should be made, not from impulse, not from external advice, but from stillness deep enough to discern illusion from essence. Silence, if you know how to enter it, is no longer your enemy. It is your ally, the most loyal editor of the film of your life. There is no light brighter than the truth illuminated in darkness, no strength more enduring than that of someone who dares to face themselves, in a room with only their own unshakable silence. And when you emerge from that room, you won't need to speak loudly, just live differently, and the world will feel it. 4. You don't need to start with something big, you just need to start. Change doesn't come with applause. It doesn't begin with grand decisions, ambitious plans, or public declarations. Real change, if it is truly change, often starts quietly. A small action, a seemingly insignificant step, a choice that veers just 1% off the usual path. But that's exactly why many people never change, because they don't believe in the small. They think, I need a big breakthrough, a total revolution, a dramatic event strong enough to pull me out of this rut. But that kind of thinking traps them in perpetual waiting. They don't begin because they're waiting for the perfect moment, and that moment never comes. You don't need to start with something big. You just need to start, not to change the whole world, but to shift the direction of your own life, even if just by half a degree. One small change today, repeated tomorrow, and the next day could take you to an entirely different place. A year from now, 5 years from now, for the rest of your life. You don't need to write an entire book. Just sit down and write one honest paragraph. You don't need to build a new career. Just dare to say no to a task that feels like a betrayal of your true self. You don't need to love yourself completely. Just stop saying things that wound your own heart. You think the small things aren't powerful enough. But think again, didn't you also lose yourself bit by bit? Through small actions just like that? One time, you faked a smile when you wanted to cry. One time, you stayed silent when you should have spoken up. One time, you said, "It's fine," when everything inside you screamed that it wasn't. You traded truth for comfort, and piece by piece, you drifted away from yourself. So the return must also begin there, with the small things. You don't need to know where you're going. You just need to know. You can't stay here forever. You don't need to anticipate every risk. Just be willing to take one step and own it. You don't need to win. You just need to stop running away. People often ask, how do I find motivation? But the truth is, you don't need motivation to start. You need courage to stop waiting for it. Motivation doesn't precede action. It follows it, like a fire. You can't wait for it to blaze before you strike the match. You have to strike first. Starting is the act of those who no longer want to postpone their pain. Starting is the first sign of awakening. Starting is the courage to say, I will not live like this another day. Don't ask, how do I change my life? Ask, am I willing to do this one small thing today? If the answer is yes, then you've already begun to change. Maybe no one sees it. Maybe there's no praise, but you know, and that's what matters most. One right action, in silence, carries the power of a declaration. It says, I'm ready to become the person I've always known I could be. And if you repeat that tomorrow, and the day after, you don't need to change the whole world. You just need to keep choosing the right path over the easy one, because in the long run, you are not defined by one big decision on a special day, but by hundreds of small ones on ordinary days. And when you look back, you'll see it all began with one action that seemed insignificant at the time. So don't wait until you're strong enough, ready enough, perfect enough. Start while you're still clumsy, doubtful, and afraid, because the one who dares to begin in imperfection, it is the one who is truly alive. 5. The greatest tragedy is not failure, but living forever in a role that was never yours. You're afraid of failure, afraid of being wrong, afraid of losing what you have. But there is something far worse than all of that. It's living your whole life not as yourself, but in a role written by someone else. A role that appears safe, seems accepted, even looks successful in the eyes of society. But it was never meant for you. We call it a stable life, but in truth, it's a performance play de exhaustion, where you recite lines that don't come from your heart, display emotions you don't actually feel, and smile while your soul quietly melts on the inside. Many people think tragedy is bankruptcy, or being abandoned, or losing everything. But the real tragedy, silent and prolonged, is living your entire life without ever truly being alive. No one forced you. No one held a gun to your head to make you play that role. But you keep performing because you're afraid. Afraid of disappointing others. Afraid of being judged. Afraid that if you take off the mask, no one will care anymore. And so, you choose to stay in a job that no longer gives you meaning, in a relationship that died long ago, but you still pretend to smile through, in a reasonable version of yourself you've built to avoid getting hurt. The price you pay isn't tears. It's the quiet erosion of your soul. Day by day, you don't collapse in a storm. You slowly dry out, like a river diverted from its source. You start to forget who you once were. Forget the things that used to stir your heart. Forget the innocence that once lived in your eyes. And worse, you begin to accept that this is normal. But deep down, you know, each time night falls, each time you're alone in a quiet room, a silent doubt returns. Is this really the life I meant to live? And if you listen long enough, you'll realize you're not truly living. You're just replaying a script that others expect. Nietzsche once said, the greatest obstacle to becoming yourself is the role you're too busy playing. We don't fear living wrongly. We fear living truthfully. Because living truthfully requires you to refuse, to give things up, to accept temporary loneliness in exchange for lasting authenticity, to accept that you may no longer be welcome at every party. But in return, you'll live in an unshakable peace. Then someone asks, if I stop, if I walk away from this role, will I lose everything? The answer is, maybe. You may lose comfort. You may lose shallow relationships. You may lose the illusion of an okay life, but you will regain something priceless. You will reclaim yourself, and from there, you can rewrite everything. You don't need to know the ending. You only need to know it's a life you choose with your own hands. Every step, even if off course, even if imperfect, is real, and it is better to fail on your own than to succeed as a counterfeit version. Because no one was born to live as a copy. So if you're feeling lost, empty, don't rush to call it a problem. See it as a signal that this role has run its course, that the real you is flapping its wings, demanding freedom, that it's time to step off the stage and begin living like someone who no longer needs an audience. And when you do that, you'll realize the tragedy isn't falling down, it's never having taken flight. 6. No one is coming to save you, and that's the most beautiful thing. Since childhood, you've been raised on fairy tales, where someone always shows up at the right time. A fairy godmother, a hero, a miracle to rescue you from pain, confusion, or failure. And then you grow up, quietly carrying that expectation into real life. You wait for someone to come and say to you, I see you, I understand you, and I'll pull you out of all this chaos. But then, no one comes. No one shows up late at night. When you're lying there, restless in the emptiness of your own heart, no one walks into the room when you collapse, extending a hand to pull you out of your bad decisions. No one deciphers the questions you've been carrying silently inside for years. And that is the most beautiful thing that has ever happened to you. Because the very moment you realize that no one is coming to save you, it is the moment you are forced to become the hero of your own life. You're no longer allowed to wait. No one left to blame. No one left to hope for. You're left with only yourself. And that is what sets you free. It's hard to accept this, because it brings a bone-deep loneliness. It's like waking up in a strange land, with no map, no signal, no guidance. But what you don't see yet is this. It is precisely in that place, where no one is left to lead you, that you finally begin to hear your own voice. When no one helps you stand, you're forced to learn how to rise. When no one understands you, you're forced to learn how to listen to yourself. When there's no one to lean on, you become the foundation. You begin to rebuild your beliefs, no longer based on others, but on the quiet steadiness of your own heart. You don't need a miracle. You need a choice, not a savior, just a commitment that says, I will no longer abandon myself. And from there, you become dangerous in the most beautiful way, because there is nothing stronger than a person who is no longer waiting to be saved. That person becomes proactive, becomes clear-minded, becomes unshakable, not because they need no one, but because they know they will never lose themselves. Even if everyone else walks away, society will tell you that you need a companion, you need a mentor, yes, but only when you no longer need to be saved. Will you be wise enough to know the difference between true companionship and dependence disguised as love or support? Because someone who needs to be saved is easy prey for manipulation, but someone who saves themselves is the one who can choose love rather than beg for it. And one day, you will look back and be grateful for that most empty time in your life, the time you thought you'd been completely abandoned, because in that place, you touched the strongest part of yourself, not the most talented, but the part that is no longer afraid. You don't need anyone to tell you you're worthy. You already know. You don't need someone to show you the way. You become quiet enough to hear your own inner compass. And when you walk with that kind of knowing, you don't need power, because you already have freedom. You don't need a savior, because you've become the keeper of your own flame. The greatest freedom is not doing whatever you want. It's having the power to no longer be ruled by anything or anyone inside your inner world. You can continue living the same way, repeating a dull film so lifeless that even you wouldn't want to watch it again. Or you can do what Tarantino once did in a small room, with no money, no connections, rewrite it scene by scene, cut out every meaningless part, shatter the old ending to open a path to an entirely new journey. Don't wait until the credits roll to realize you've been playing the wrong role. Don't wait until the screen fades to black to wish for a second take, because life has no take two. Right now, tonight, pick up the pen, not to write lofty goals, but to write down the truth, how you've been living wrong, how fear has held you back, and how will you rewrite this script. You don't need to be a genius. You just need to do what 99% won't dare to. Become the director of your own life. And if you're ready, leave just one sentence: I'm rewriting the script of my life. Because the moment you dare to write that first line, you are no longer the same person.